Pennsylvania is very important, and I want to play you. This is David Ignatius of the Washington Post. It was on Morning Joe this morning where, yes, they have reached out to the president-elect to begin talking to him, and their viewers are outraged that a man they said was the second coming of Hitler is someone they want to break bread with. But this is David Ignatius from this morning on Morning Joe.
We're in the business of covering the world, trying to see it whole. And if people think that we are partisans on one side or another, I think in the end, their confidence in our ability to tell the truth, to do our job declines. You see that some of that in some of the poll numbers about how people feel about journalism. I don't want to add to that.
Yeah, I don't want to add to that, he says. So why aren't you covering Pennsylvania, David Ignatius? Morning Joe, why isn't that your lead story? You guys have lectured us for 4 years that the Republicans and Donald Trump are a unique threat to democracy, that Donald Trump is an authoritarian, a tyrant who disrespects democracy, wants to end democracy. In Pennsylvania, the Democrats are now openly, brazenly trying to steal the United States Senate election from Senator-elect Dave McCormick. The Democrat-controlled Supreme Court of Pennsylvania ruled that they cannot count ballots that are unsigned, undated, or not from people who were properly registered to vote. Keep in mind that last one. They're not allowed to count ballots from people who were not properly registered to vote. That's not me. That's the Democrat majority on the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. And in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, and others, Democrats are openly ignoring the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania and counting those ballots. In fact, one member of the Board of Elections said everybody breaks the law. Everybody breaks the law. So she gets to break the law because everybody gets to break the law. And these are the people who spent 4 long years telling us Donald Trump and the Republicans are a threat to democracy. The Democratic spin is, well, we have to count every vote democratically cast. The difference between democracy and mob is the rule of law. And the rule of law in Pennsylvania outlines which votes to cast and which votes to count and which votes matter and which votes don't. And they're ignoring all of those things in the name of counting all the ballots. The ballots from the Russians? I mean, 8 years ago, you guys told us the Russians stole the election. We don't know that some of the people voting in Pennsylvania whose votes they're counting actually aren't people who aren't even legal American citizens. But if they vote Democrat, the Democrats say that's okay. And they're real quiet about this on MSNBC. They're pretty quiet about it on CNN as well. They're quiet about it on the editorial pages of the New York Times and the Washington Post that spent 4 years lecturing us about preserving our democracy and saving the rule of law. And here are the Democrats in Pennsylvania openly defying the Democrat-controlled Pennsylvania Supreme Court's ruling. Now, let's back up. The reason that Pennsylvania is still counting votes actually, in part, is the blame of the Republicans. It's true. We've got to be intellectually honest about this to get to what's happening now. A law was proposed in Pennsylvania that was killed by the Republican majority in the Pennsylvania legislature that would have allowed the processing of absentee ballots before Election Day. They would have essentially adopted the model from Florida and what Georgia has now deployed. Essentially, what it does is you don't count the votes until Election Day, but you can process the ballots. So you can make sure that the voters are legitimate and the vote is lawfully to be cast and run it through a scanner, even though you can't see the results. Pennsylvania Republicans said, nope, we don't want to do that. We don't want to do what Florida did. We don't want to do what Georgia did. The rule in Pennsylvania is you cannot even begin to process the ballots until 7 a.m. on the day of the election. That means that in Pennsylvania, you're not allowed to even look at the absentee ballot and say, can this absentee ballot be counted until beginning at 7 a.m. on Election Day. That's why the process takes so long, and it was the Republicans to blame. The Democrats agreed to adopt Ron DeSantis' rules in Florida, and the Pennsylvania Republicans, who also, by the way, make you go to special stores to buy beer, said, no, you're not allowed to do that. Pennsylvania is one of those weird states where there are only certain stores open at certain times of day where you're allowed to buy beer of limited quantities. It's a very weird state. Wonderful state, wonderful people, but also stupid laws. And it was the Republicans who blocked this one. So you can't even begin to process the absentee ballots. Well, now here's the thing. Pennsylvania voters have a habit of casting their absentee ballots and then showing up on Election Day. I don't know why that is, but Pennsylvania disproportionately does that. So, in addition to all the absentee ballots being processed on Election Day, you got a bunch of people who show up to vote on Election Day who cast an absentee ballot. In Pennsylvania, my understanding is there are about 250,000 people who cast an absentee ballot and then showed up on Election Day to vote. And they have to vote by a provisional ballot. A provisional ballot is a ballot where you fill out the ballot form like it's an absentee ballot, and that ballot is not allowed to be cast unless they can find your absentee ballot and pull it out of the system or make sure your absentee ballot didn't come in. Well, what about absentee ballots that were cast on Election Day? So they were postmarked Election Day and showed up a week later. There's the problem. Those absentee ballots can still be counted, so the provisional ballots cannot be processed until after the absentee ballots have had time to come in. Is that not the most confusing thing you've heard? That's Pennsylvania. Oh, and by the way, every county in Pennsylvania has a different method of counting votes. Some are one machine, some are another machine, some are paper ballots. Is it not all very confusing to you? That's Pennsylvania. And the Republicans and Democrats together have made that system that way. But that's no excuse for a court order from the state's highest court saying you cannot count an absentee ballot if it wasn't dated. That's express law in Pennsylvania. In fact, the ballot form says you must date the ballot, and some people have chosen not to. And that's not the inside envelope with the ballot, but the outside envelope that you fill out. For those of you who've never cast an absentee ballot, I guess I should do this for you. Most of you probably have never cast an absentee ballot. An absentee ballot comes in 3 envelopes. There's the outer envelope that comes to you that contains the 2 interior envelopes and the ballot. When you open that out external ballot envelope, you can throw it away. And then you have 2 envelopes and a ballot. You fill out the ballot. You fold up the ballot and you put it into an envelope that says absentee ballot only. So you put that ballot in the envelope that says absentee ballot only, and you seal that envelope. And you put that envelope in the second envelope. And the second envelope has a big flap on the back of it. And you have to fill up your name and your address. You got to have your signature, and you must date it. And on that envelope, you put the stamp, and it goes to the mailbox. And what happens is, when the ballots come in to ensure anonymity, they first look at the form on the back of the ballot. Was it dated? Is there a postmark on the envelope? Does the signature match the voter registration card? Is all the information correct? If they say yes, they rip the flap off so that they can take the interior envelope out, and that interior envelope is the one with the absentee ballot in it, and they set it aside. And now, once that ballot's removed from the exterior envelope, no one knows whose ballot that is. You have no idea whose name who cast that ballot. So you can't take that ballot envelope and stick it into a stack by itself until you verify the information on the outer envelope. And the law in Pennsylvania says it's got to be postmarked, and it's got to be signed, and it's got to be dated. And the Pennsylvania Supreme Court has said the same thing. And the Pennsylvania Supreme Court went one step further and said if you can't verify that the person appropriately registered to vote, you cannot count it. Because in the United States of America, you have to be registered to vote in order to vote. You can't just show up and cast a ballot. We got to know who you are. And in Pennsylvania, county Democrats have said, screw all that. We're just going to count the votes. We're going to count them all. We don't care if they have a postmark. We don't care if they are signed. We don't care if they're from a legally registered voter. We're going to count all the ballots. And what that's done is it hasn't defeated Dave McCormick. It's made the margin so small that he can go into a recount Well, how are we going to separate out now all of those ballots that should not have been counted in the first time? We don't know whose they are now. They've removed them from the external envelope. They're in the pool of absentee ballots. We don't know. They sowed chaos into the system. Now, here's the thing. It does not look like there are enough outstanding ballots to overthrow the election. There were just enough to get it into a recount. But Pennsylvania also has another funny law, one that Democrats and Republicans alike in Pennsylvania have refused to change. In Pennsylvania, there's no ballot count. There's no ballot report. You see, if you go to Gwinnett County, Georgia, or Maricopa County, Arizona, the county can tell you, here's how many ballots we sent out, here's how many ballots we've received, here's how many we haven't counted, here's how many we have counted, here's how many we have left to count. They don't do that in any county in Pennsylvania. So no one really knows how many ballots were sent out and how many ballots came in and how many have been counted and how many are left to be counted. The speculation, credible speculation, is there are not enough ballots left to throw the election into doubt. But they're trying. And if this was a Republican that had done this, Morning Joe would not be talking about how members of the media need to not be fair and balanced and not pick sides. They would be talking about Republicans are trying to steal a Senate election. CNN would be talking about Republicans are trying to steal a Senate election. The New York Times and the Wall Street Journal would be outraged, their editorial voices filled with outrage over the theft of democracy in Pennsylvania. All of them are silent today. Instead, they're doing their internal soul reflecting of why don't people believe us anymore? Why don't people trust us? Here's an example of why. You spent 4 years lecturing us on how vital democracy is to this country and how vital the rule of law is to this country and how Donald Trump would upend the rule of law and threaten our democracy, and yet it's the Democrats doing it in Pennsylvania, and you people don't care. You don't care. You're not grilling these people about counting ballots the Supreme Court said not to count. You're not grilling these people about their poor handling of the ballots. You're not grilling them about their setup. You're not doing any of that. You would do it if the Republicans were in charge, and you know darn well you would. The Democrats in Pennsylvania are trying to steal an election, and they're brazen about it, and their accomplices in the media who have been wringing their hands about threats to democracy are okay with it because it's all about power, and the Democrats are on the verge of losing it. And the irony here as well is that they're going to lose this election, and even if they were somehow to be able to pull it out and steal it and win it, they won't get a Senate majority, and the Republicans in the Senate can refuse to seat Bob Casey, given what the Democrats in Pennsylvania have done to the rule of law. And then you and I both know everybody in the media will be upset, but they're not upset so long as it's the Democrats trying to steal the election.